Hello ladies and gentlemen, Spirit of the Law here. This might sound like a weird idea, but I want to know if there's a time that over micromanagement of focus firing units can give a worse outcome. And I don't just mean if you have bad micro, I mean you're doing it properly and it can still give a worse result. Just in the last video there was a clip where I took out 3 computer mangonels with 10 crossbows just using the split technique. So obviously micro can make a huge impact, and there's certainly some very extreme examples like this where you can get way more value out of your units by paying a bit of attention to them. But then last night, here I am, real game situation. I'm Turks and I'm going into heavy cavalry archers, which Turks of course get with 20 extra HP in the expansions, as well as all the armor upgrades, so they're pretty tanky. One of my opponents, Mad Archer Jr., is Hans and has also gone Heavy Cavalry Archer, so we're about to have a showdown. We have almost identical numbers, but his are of course weaker in terms of max HP, so I should have the advantage here. I throw the Cavalry Archers in there and we start microing each other's units one at a time, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Of course it's hard to see because it's all happening behind this mill, but it looks like we're exchanging pretty evenly, and we're losing roughly equal numbers. I just have this feeling I should be winning by more than this though. This really shouldn't be an equal exchange at all since my archers have 100 HP. So I make a little in-game adjustment and stop microing entirely. And then things seem to go better after that. So should I stop wasting my time with focus firing? Or was there something special about this situation? I'm curious about what's going on here, so let's check it out. First of all, let's try a control group setup to see the effect of micro versus not, and we'll use heavy cavalry archers since we're already on the topic. In a no micro situation of AIs against each other, it's what we expect, and they pretty much cancel out. There's a little bit of randomness in the results, and either one can have up to a quarter of their units left, but they tend to be on fairly low health. Now the concept of how micro helps is easy to demonstrate. The simplest demonstration is when I have 4 units on 2 teams. Up until the point that the first archer dies, both sides have equal damage output, and both of my units should be at half health. But after that point, one side has double the damage output, giving me a surviving unit when we started with identical armies. It's a pretty nifty principle, and it's why we micromanage ranged units. Now if I do that first experiment again, but controlling one of the sides and focus firing the enemy units one at a time, I would expect this principle to be applying here too, and I should do way better. That's not what we see though. If I try it again, it happens every time. It's like there's some other effect working against me on this scale that wasn't happening in the smaller case. Just letting my units pick their own targets, they tend to shoot at the closest one, and they do a better job than I did with micro. Interesting. So what's going on here? Well, I know I have some very clever viewers, and many of you have some ideas already. A big thing I believe is happening is a lot of arrows are hitting the ground. The cavalry archers are doing 7 damage per shot out of the 80 HP, so 12 shots should take out a heavy cavalry archer. That's a big deal in this case, because when I focus fire with 20 archers, I'm dealing theoretically 140 damage out to my opponent once I take their armor into account, but only the first 80 of that matters. And then the unit dies and all my extra arrows harmlessly hit the ground. My non-focus firing opponent legitimately deals out that 140 damage spread out over my units. I've reduced his damage output by 7 as part of that earlier effect that we looked at, but I've wasted 60 damage in doing that. Suddenly by scaling up, we now have this competing effect of the wasted damage. It's reducing my overall damage output in order to more efficiently lower his. And the more units I have, the more I'm wasting with each shot, until at a certain point, the waste is outweighing the benefits. Now to be fair, when we talk about micro, we usually mean in small groups, where your group of crossbows maybe don't take out a knight in one hit, so you end up only wasting a tiny bit of damage on that final shot. On this scale, focus firing is definitely the way to go. One possible way you might try to deal with the problems that happen at larger scales is if you manage your big army as smaller groups. That's dealing with the shortcomings of micro by using more micro. And it's way easier to say than to actually do that. Or at least I was completely scattered while doing it and didn't get better results than just letting them pick their own targets anyway. But feel free to go ahead and give it a try yourself. Another variable back in the original scenario was some of his units were damaged. Now, focus firing on a damaged unit can also waste your damage output for a similar reason to what I was just talking about. To take an extreme example, if he was on 1 HP and I just fired 50 or 100 damage worth of arrows at him, that wasn't a very effective use of my numbers. This also happens if your first shot has him down way lower than 50% health, but wasn't enough to kill him. Here's an example where I have some units all on half health. Maybe they took a mangonel shot or ran under a town center, and you can see I do much better letting my units pick targets rather than focus firing. In fact, focus firing basically made their units as effective as if they weren't damaged at all. Letting my units pick their targets gives way better results. One last thing to think about as well, one of the reasons a Mangudai is much better than a cavalry archer is Mangudai have an instant response when you target a unit, whereas cavalry archers take a quick break first. Am I slowing my cavalry archer's firing rate by micromanaging? Because that would be bad. Certainly, I can stop my cavalry archers from ever firing by clicking around his army before the firing animation completes. Well, here I have 2 cavalry archers. I'll let the bottom one fire at the house without interference, and the top one I'll alternate between 2 targets, and we'll see if the switching back and forth introduces that delay time or not. It's pretty easy to see in this example that changing targets doesn't affect the reload time, so we don't have to worry about that, and everything so far should apply equally well to the Mangudai. If we take a step back from the mechanics and look at the real-world example again, do we have more insight now about whether or not I did the right thing by stopping the micro? Well, some of his units were damaged, but it's not like all of them were, and that's probably not having a big effect here. What's more important is in the first focus fire shot with my 21 archers, I was wasting about 9 of those, basically giving me a damage output of 80 instead of 147. That doesn't sound like a good idea. Interestingly, I had around 16 units to his 11 at the point that I decided to stop doing micro altogether, and that's probably close to the point that focus firing shots on a full health unit wasn't wasting damage anymore. Strictly speaking, I probably should have done it backwards the way I did it, and opened up with letting them pick their targets when we both had 20-ish units, and then focus firing when I was down to 12 or 15 units left. If I run it both ways with 16 Turk cavalry archers to 11 Huns, I take slightly less damage overall by focus firing, but they're pretty close as expected. And as army sizes go down, focus firing should start to take over as the tactic that gives better results. As the other side to this, what should he have done as the Huns against Turks with the higher HP, armor, and 1 extra unit? Probably the best thing would be to not take the fight, but if he was cornered and had to, we might ask whether he should focus fire or should have just let them pick their own targets, bearing in mind that it would take 20 of his shots to take down 1 of my units. In a test, the difference was pretty small, but he would do more damage overall by not managing them. I think a lot of that is because once the Huns lose 1 of their 20 units, I now have to double shot all of his. And after the first shots, they're on very low HP, so I'm wasting almost 100 damage on every second shot there for a while. So to pull it all together, if I had to come up with a main takeaway from this testing, it's probably don't mess with the Turk cavalry archers. But more generally, just being aware that the bigger armies get, the harder micro is to do, and maybe surprisingly, the less effective it becomes against other archer units. It's a good skill to use against small numbers of tanky units, but as armies get bigger, things have a way of becoming more complicated. So being aware of situations where you have a lot of overkill, focus firing is going to end up wasting a lot more effort and end up giving you worse results anyway. So that's all for this one. I hope it helps you out sometime. The only rule is to never use anything you learn in these videos against me. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.